Hello and welcome to today's video. In the last week or so in the online knitting world, there's been a lot of chat about illegally sharing patterns or people sharing patterns through various websites. This is nothing new. This has been going on for as long as I've been designing patterns, which is nearly 20 years ago now. And I expect it will continue to carry on, even though a lot of people are horrified and outraged by it. And there's been a lot of designers and knitters who've been writing about it on their social media in the last week. So I thought I would chat about it because apparently some people think it's a grey area and some people think that as designers we're gatekeeping our hobby. So I thought I'd chat about it today. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you're new here, my name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns. I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. And as this is likely to be a slightly controversial topic, although I don't really see why it should be, please leave your views in the comments below this video. A bit of background to what's been happening in the last week. So I'm filming this on the 1st of February, but this video may not go out for a few more weeks. I'm filming a few videos ahead to upload for the second half of February and beginning of March because I've got a lot of stuff going on, and I also have to go to Norway to see my parents again. So I'm trying to get ahead of myself a little bit this week by filming a few videos. So if you're thinking, well, this is old news, this was talked about 3-4 weeks ago, that is because I'm filming this on the 1st of February. And this week, loads of people have been chatting in the online knitting world about sharing patterns. So what we're talking about here are people buying a digital copy of a pattern and sharing it in an online group so that anyone who's a member of that online group can download the pattern. Somebody posted on their Instagram a few days ago about Discord servers being set up specifically to share patterns. These are not patterns that can be found for free online. These are patterns that are available for purchase. And there have been Discord groups set up to share these patterns. Now, this is nothing new. There has been online forums and groups sharing patterns illegally for many, many, many years. I've seen my patterns sold on Etsy illegally, and I have also seen my patterns uploaded to Russian websites and Chinese websites and various other websites, free for anyone to download. I've seen my patterns on Pinterest, and I have also in the past tried to get those patterns taken down if they were shared illegally. So I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. I found some patterns once many years ago on Etsy, and some of them were copies of my magazine designs, and they had the photos and everything from the magazine, and some of them were my self-published patterns, including photos taken in my lounge, and some had photos of my children modeling my patterns, which was quite upsetting because that felt more personal because the photos were taken inside my house or of my children. With the magazine designs, I contacted the magazine in question and said, I found this listing on Etsy. They appear to be selling the pattern that I designed for you for this issue, selling it illegally. I don't know if they've been authorized to sell it. And basically the reply I got back was, if they have bought a copy of the magazine and they tear out each individual pattern and sell each individual pattern individually, that's not illegal. And the same thing for books. I've got friends who have bought patterns on specifically Etsy and eBay, I think. And it turned out that when they received the pattern they'd ordered, it actually a pattern that had been cut out of a book. So somebody has bought a book and cut out all the individual patterns, presumably put them in like a plastic folder or something, and just sold them individually. And that apparently, from what I understand, is not illegal. If you buy a magazine or a book and you photocopy those patterns and then sell them, that is illegal. So from what I understand, if you buy a physical book or a physical pattern and you decide you don't like it, or you finish with it, you're not going to need it anymore, you've knitted what you want to knit from it and you don't need it anymore, you can give it to a friend or sell it to somebody or share it with somebody. I've recently been selling quite a few knitting and crochet and sewing books through my D-Stash section on my website. And they were books that I bought in the past. Some of them I've used, some of them I haven't used. But I decided for various reasons that I didn't want to keep those books anymore. So I listed them on my website at a reduced cost to sell them, because I thought there's no point them staying on my shelves when I needed that space for other things. And I decided, because I paid a lot of money for those books when I first bought them, I decided rather than giving them to a charity shop that I would sell them, because I wanted to recoup a little bit of that cost. I could have given them to a charity shop or to knitting friends, but I decided to try and sell the ones I could, because I spent a lot of money on them and we were talking about a lot of books and I wanted to recoup some of that money. And there's nothing wrong with that. If I buy a pattern and decide to lend it to a friend, that's fine. If I have a physical copy of a pattern, say this is a pattern, and I give that to a knitting friend for her to knit it, then she gives it back to me, that's fine. From what I understand, if I take this physical copy of a pattern and photocopy it and give a photocopy to a friend and keep a copy for myself, that's not okay, because then two copies exist of something that originally only had one copy. Or if I go into knitting group and I'm knitting something and the people at knitting group say, oh, I like that, can you share the pattern? And I say, yeah, hang on a second, I'll just go downstairs to the reception and ask if they can photocopy for me. How many of you want a copy? And 10 people put their hand up, and I go downstairs to the office and say, can you photocopy this for me? I need 10 copies, please. Well, thank you very much. Go back up and give them out. That is not allowed. And that was something that was going on in a knitting group I am a part of a few years ago. And I did say something, and so did a couple other people. But it still carried on, and it probably still goes on to this day. The problem is with digital copies is that you can share a lot more. So if I buy a digital copy of a pattern, I can upload that on the website and anyone can download it if I allow them to. Or I can send it to hundreds of friends very, very easily. And that is not legal. That is pattern theft. So some of the things that was shared this week was saying that sharing patterns on websites is a grey area. In screenshots I saw, somebody said, well, I live in a poor country and I can't afford your patterns, but I really want to knit it, so therefore I think it's okay. Somebody else said, well, they cost too much money and I want to knit it, so therefore that's okay. Well, yeah, I would like to knit everything in cashmere from now on, thank you very much, but I can't afford to knit everything I knit in cashmere. So shall I just go up to somebody who sells cashmere and say, I really like your yarn and I would like to knit with it. Can you give me some, please? Because I can't afford it. I think what you're charging is too expensive. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go into a shop and say, I can't afford to buy your yarn. Can you give me a discount, or can you give it to me for free? You wouldn't do that. Why would you do that to designers regarding patterns? It is easy with digital things that we buy, whether it is music, films, patterns, books, whatever, to think you can share it. Some people may think that popular designers can afford to lose a few pattern sales. Now, I would say the majority of designers, probably 99.99999% of designers, struggle to cover their expenses. Ravelry used to put out statistics, I think every year, I'm not sure they still do or not, but where they shared statistics about how many patterns that were uploaded for sale on their website actually sold certain number of copies, and you could tell from that there was like a handful of big names that sold quite a few patterns, and the rest of us were making very little. I will say that for most of my patterns, I probably barely break even. So you might say, well, why do I do it? Well, that's a whole nother question. I wouldn't be doing this if I wasn't also teaching and designing for magazines. And that's why I design for magazines, because it is a guaranteed income. I know how much I'm going to pay before I do the work. And that's why I also do a lot of teaching, because teaching is much better paid per hour than designing is. But I enjoy designing, and I've been knitting anyway. So I think, well, if I release the pattern because I enjoy the process, then I make a little bit of money. Also, a lot of designers are actually disabled people. So you might look at me and think I look perfectly healthy, but I'm actually disabled. I had to give up my work for health reasons about 25 years ago. I haven't worked in a normal job as an employed person since I was 30, and I got into designing and then eventually teaching and things after a number of years of staying at home, being able to work because I just wasn't well enough. And then I eventually started knitting again. I got into designing, and I managed to turn that into a way of earning a little bit of money. Some of the other things that were discussed in this exchange that I saw about this topic was gatekeeping. And there were people who were saying that designers were gatekeeping knitting, basically stopping people from getting into knitting because they couldn't afford to buy patterns. Now, I will say that I know you can buy cheap yarn, but most yarn is not cheap. So if you can afford to buy yarn, can't you also afford to buy a pattern? Most patterns aren't that expensive. My patterns currently sell for, I think it's £6. When I started selling patterns, I was selling them for £3.50. Then I increased it to £4, £4.50, £5. And I can't remember at the moment whether they're £5 or £6. They might actually be £5. But most patterns aren't that expensive. When you compare them to things like sewing patterns are a lot more expensive than knitting patterns. And I understand from a lot of people that crochet patterns are even cheaper, which, I mean, they shouldn't be. If I was designing crochet patterns, I think I'd have to make them more expensive because they take me a lot longer to do. But knitting patterns are relatively a cheap part of your hobby. So unless you're buying really, really budget-friendly yarn, which I know some people do, some people are buying yarn from charity shops or like estate sales, or when cheap supermarkets like Aldi and stuff have yarns for sale. Some people are buying very cheap yarn, but most knitters that I know are buying yarn that is kind of mid-range and above. And if you are buying that kind of yarn, you probably should also budget to buy a pattern. If you don't want to buy a pattern, there are loads of free patterns online. If you go on Ravelry, there's thousands of free patterns online, and that you can download legally. So is it okay to share those free patterns with other people? Not really. So I would say if I had a free pattern online, if somebody said, can I just download it and then upload it to my Facebook group, for example, and let people download it freely, I would say no. Can you please send them to the pattern page for them to download it for there? Designers use free patterns as a way of advertising themselves. So I can't remember at the moment whether I have any free patterns or not on Ravelry. I probably do, but I can't remember. They're quite older ones, I think. But normally a lot of designers would have 1 or 2 free patterns to use as like a taster. So if you want to try my patterns but you haven't before, you can kind of try one before you buy if you like. So if you took that pattern and uploaded it to your Facebook group and people just download, then people wouldn't see my other pattern. Put my pattern page link on your Facebook group, people would go to that page and possibly also look at other things I had for sale. Especially if that pattern is hosted on my website, it would take them to my website, so it would expose my other work to them as well. So that's why people get upset about having free patterns shared like that, because free patterns are usually used to publicize a designer's other work. I have come across in the past yarn shops that have bought a copy of a pattern and then given it away with yarn being purchased without permission of the designer. That is not legal. Or they have taken free patterns and given them away. And I would say that that's also not legal, because even though the pattern is free, if you have to go to the designer's page and download it yourself, you are then receiving a bit of advertising, I guess, from that designer. So I do know that a lot of yarn shops will download, especially free patterns, and just print them out and give them away with yarn purchases. But I know yarn shops also who've done that with paid for patterns, and that's definitely wrong without permission. So one of the comments I saw was about gatekeeping. So if you think about it this way, I have a Netflix account. Netflix makes me pay every month to watch their content. So is Netflix gatekeeping streaming services? Are they gatekeeping my access to films and TV series? I mean, I prefer if it was free, but I've got to pay for it. If I only use what Netflix offers, I have to pay for it. Same thing with other online streaming services. Your local supermarket, you can't just go in there and help yourself to food. You have to pay for it. So they gatekeeping your access to food. Go into a yarn shop, I can't just ask for yarn for free. If I want to have a new software on my computer to write my patterns in, for example, I have to pay for that. If you are sharing copies of digital things that you have purchased, it is illegal, it is theft, and it is not okay. But as I've said, these things happen, and I have, in the number of years I've been designing, I have frequently found copies of my pattern online. I used to occasionally search for it. I don't anymore. But occasionally somebody will message me and say, I saw your pattern on this website or on that website. If it's somewhere that's easy for the item to be taken down, I might request it. So if it's on Etsy, I haven't actually done this with Etsy for a number of years, but I know when I did find some of my patterns on Etsy, I did request that Etsy take it down. I said the person selling these patterns had no permission to sell them, blah, blah, blah. And Etsy took them down. I don't know whether the person put them back up again. I don't know. But I don't know whether that's as easy now, because Etsy has changed a lot since I went through this process. I remember once finding some of my patterns uploaded to a Russian website. Well, I don't speak Russian. I don't know anyone who speaks Russian. And I thought trying to get that taken down would be a lot more difficult. Also, I can't afford to pay lawyers. I'm not going to go the legal route because I just can't afford to. So I just ignored it and decided that those people who were downloading those patterns probably weren't my customers anyway and will probably never buy patterns from me. And that's the attitude I try to take. Yes, every sale matters to me. And if you buy a pattern from me and print it off your whole knitting group rather than your 10 knitting friends buying individual patterns from me, that makes a big difference to me. If your friends saw you knitting one of my patterns and they said, oh, I really like that pattern, and you said, well, here's where you can buy it, and they all went and bought a copy, that would make a huge difference to me, and I would be ever so grateful. If somebody told me that, oh, I knitted one of your patterns, a friend of mine gave it to me, or a friend of mine forwarded it to me, I would be upset. And I might say, well, that's a bit wrong, but I probably would just say, oh, did they? And it would upset me, but I try not to let it get to me, because I feel like the people who download patterns that have been illegally uploaded to various online groups probably aren't going to buy patterns from me anyway. And I don't think that makes it okay, but I have to decide what I'm going to spend my time and energy on. And I have decided that things like that are too upsetting and that I can't spend time and energy on things like that because I can't do anything about it. I can't stop it. I don't have any staff working for me who can deal with it. My business is me, and my husband helps me out when I do shows, but otherwise it's just me, myself, and I do everything. And if I had somebody else that I could kind of say to, can you deal with this because it's too upsetting, then that would be fine, but I don't have that. So I would say that the next time you're in an online group or even in a in-person knitting group and somebody offers to share a pattern, especially if it's a pattern that somebody has paid for, somebody's selling, I would say challenge them about it, say that it's not okay. Don't download patterns that have been uploaded illegally to various online groups, because it's not okay and it is hurting designers. And if designers can't make any money from designing, they will have to quit. I know a number of people who've designed since I started that have given up because they just couldn't make any money. And if I could do a normal job, if I could go back to what I used to do before, which was office work, I probably would have done and just kept knitwear designing as a hobby and maybe done occasional workshops, because I could have a much better, much more reliable income if I did. But because of my health problems, I can't sit at a desk for a set number of hours every day, or even 3 days a week. I have to have the flexibility to be able to work when I feel okay and not be able to work when I don't feel okay, and I need to be able to do an hour at my desk, go and sit downstairs in a comfy chair and relax for an hour, and then go back and do another hour of work and then relax for an hour. And most jobs don't give you that option. Even in these days with working from home, most jobs wouldn't give you that flexibility. So that's why this is the job I can do, and it contributes to my family and to my lifestyle. But if I had to live off my job, have to support myself from my job, I would not be doing it, because I wouldn't be able to make enough money to live off. And that's the reality for most people working in this industry, apart from probably the very, very big names, I think. So I apologize if this has been a little bit rambly. I tried to write down my thoughts so I could share them in a logical way, but I probably have rambled a little bit too much. But I will try and edit it into some kind of coherent video. But let me know. And you can be honest, I'm not going to block anyone unless you're being rude and using swear words. I'm not going to block anyone. Have you downloaded patterns that you knew you probably shouldn't have because they were uploaded illegally? Are you part of any of these pattern sharing groups? Are you part of groups where patterns are shared? Somebody was sharing with her followers the other day. She has quite a big Facebook group, and she said that she knows that if somebody shares, finished project, I knitted this, and somebody comments pattern please, that a lot of people just message that person privately through Messenger and send them a copy of the pattern, not the link to where to buy the pattern. I always assume when people said pattern please, which is a common thing in Facebook groups for people to go pattern please, that they would just share the link. But apparently she said that because she's tried it, that people will quite often just send you a message with the complete pattern. So I may have to test that out in some of the Facebook groups I'm a member of. I don't know if I can be bothered, but don't do that, please. Support designers if you want them to be around. The designers you like, support their work. If you don't feel like their work is worth paying for, then find designers that you do think are worth paying for. If you don't want to pay for somebody's design, see if they have any free patterns, or see if you can find similar free patterns online. There are thousands of free patterns on Ravelry, so do go and check that out and download patterns that are offered for free on reputable sites like Ravelry or a designer's website or whatever. And don't take part in this illegal sharing of patterns, because it is theft, is illegal, it's not a grey area, it's not gatekeeping, it is wrong. You wouldn't go into a yarn shop and steal yarn just because you couldn't afford to buy yarn. So why would you steal patterns just because you think you can't afford to buy patterns or you don't want to buy patterns? I do have sympathy for people who can't afford to buy patterns. Knitting is not a cheap hobby, but there are plenty of free patterns out there for those who can't afford or don't want to pay for them. Just use the free ones that are available out there. Don't steal them, please. So that is it for today. Sorry if this video is a little bit rambly, but tell me in the comments what your thoughts are. If you were part of an online group where you could freely download patterns, and you suspected that they weren't authorized to offer those patterns for download, what would you do? Would you actually challenge them? Would you leave the group? I can understand if you don't want to challenge it, because that can be difficult, but would you at least leave the group? I think that's what I might do if I didn't feel like I could challenge the group on it. I would just leave. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing, and leave me a comment. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.